My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my adult life, I believed I was living the kind of dream other people envied. I married young, at 25, to a man I thought was everything a husband should be. His name was Daniel Carter. Tall, charming, ambitious, he had that smile that could disarm even the coldest heart. We met at a friend's wedding, and within a year, he swept me off my feet, promising a life full of love, laughter, and security. And for a while, he delivered. We bought a modest but beautiful home in the suburbs of Chicago. A 2-story house with a white picket fence, a big backyard where our kids would eventually play, and a warm, sunlit kitchen where I pictured myself cooking dinners while Daniel came home from work, wrapping his arms around me from behind. Those weren't just fantasies, they actually happened. At least, in the beginning. 2 years into our marriage, our first child, Olivia, was born. I'll never forget the way Daniel cried when he held her for the first time. He wasn't embarrassed or shy about it, he let the tears fall freely, his voice breaking as he whispered, "She's perfect, Emily. We made this." In that moment, I thought, this man is my forever. A couple of years later, we had our son, Noah. Suddenly, we were a family of 4, and my life felt complete. On weekends, Daniel would take Olivia to the park while I stayed home with Noah. He'd push her on the swings, chase her around the playground, then come home with ice cream dripping down his shirt because Olivia insisted on sharing. Our neighbors used to joke that we looked like the picture-perfect family from a magazine ad. And honestly, I believed it. Daniel was a financial consultant. His job demanded long hours, but I never resented it. He provided for us. He was the kind of man who would come home exhausted but still make time to kiss me goodnight, tuck the kids into bed, and ask about my day. When friends asked if I trusted him, I laughed. Of course I do. He's Daniel. He's not the type to lie. For 12 years, I lived with that belief. I clung to it like a lifeline. We had traditions, little rituals that made our bond feel unshakable. Every Friday night was family movie night. We'd order pizza, the kids would pick out a Disney movie, and Daniel and I would sit on the couch, our hands intertwined under the blanket. Every summer, we went on road trips, sometimes just a few hours away to Wisconsin Dells, other times across states to visit his parents in Ohio. He was the kind of dad who made silly voices during bedtime stories, who got down on the floor to build Lego castles, who taught Olivia how to ride a bike while Noah cheered her on. From the outside, and even to myself, we were solid. Unshakable. Safe. And yet, looking back now, I realize how easy it is to believe in illusions. Because that's exactly what it was, an illusion. At the time, though, I didn't see the cracks. If you had asked me then, "Emily, are you happy?" I would have smiled and said, "Absolutely." I couldn't ask for more. Because I wasn't just married to Daniel, I was married to the idea of Daniel. The man I believed him to be. There were no warning signs in those early years, nothing to make me suspect that one day the same man who swore to protect me would be the one to betray me in the deepest way possible. I still remember one particular evening, a memory I now revisit with bitter irony. It was our 10th wedding anniversary. Daniel surprised me with dinner at a rooftop restaurant downtown, overlooking the Chicago skyline. He handed me a small velvet box, and inside was a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Forever Us." At that moment, with the city lights twinkling and his hand covering mine across the table, I truly believed in forever. I believed that our love was unbreakable, that our marriage was something sacred, untouchable by the world's ugliness. I can almost laugh at my own naivety now. How blind I was. Because what I didn't know then, and what I would only come to learn later, was that while I was clutching onto the dream of forever, Daniel was already unraveling it. Slowly, silently, behind my back. But back then, I was blissfully unaware. I was just Emily Carter, wife, mother, believer in happy endings. And maybe that's why the truth, when it finally came crashing down, shattered me so completely. Because when you build your whole world around a person, when you trust them with every piece of your heart, the betrayal doesn't just break you, it annihilates you. But that part of the story comes later. For now, all you need to know is this: in the beginning, we had everything. A perfect family. A perfect marriage. A perfect life. Or so I thought. If I had to pinpoint when things began to shift, I'd say it was subtle, so subtle that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. You know how people say the cracks in a marriage don't show up as earthquakes, but as hairline fractures? That's exactly how it happened with Daniel and me. It started with the small things. Little absences that felt harmless at first. He stopped calling me during his lunch breaks, something he used to do religiously. It was one of those small rituals I adored. He'd phone me from the office, sometimes with background noise of chatter and ringing phones, and say, "Hey Em, just checking in. How's your day?" Sometimes he'd ask about the kids, sometimes he'd share a funny story about a coworker. Those calls were like a bridge between our worlds, his fast-paced corporate life and my quieter, domestic one. But then, slowly, they stopped. One missed call turned into two. Two turned into none. When I asked why, he shrugged, "Just busy, Em. Things are crazy at work." And I believed him. After all, he had always worked hard. I didn't want to be the kind of wife who nagged or doubted. Then came the dinners. Our family dinners had always been sacred. No matter how late he came home, he made a point to sit with us, to hear about Olivia's day at school or Noah's new obsession with dinosaurs. But suddenly, he started missing them. At first, once a week. Then twice. Then 3. His excuses always sounded plausible: late meetings, urgent deadlines, clients who just wouldn't let him leave. The kids noticed before I did. One night, Olivia asked, "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy eat with us anymore?" I smiled, brushed her hair out of her face, and said, "Daddy's busy, sweetheart. But he loves you very much." It was true, wasn't it? Soon after, I began noticing something else: his phone. Daniel had never been secretive before. His phone was always lying around, buzzing with harmless notifications, work emails, ESPN updates, texts from his brother. But suddenly, it was always face down. Locked. Silent. And when it buzzed, he'd snatch it up quickly, almost defensively. I'd joke, "What are you hiding? A second family?" expecting him to laugh like he used to. But instead, he'd snap, "Don't be ridiculous, Emily. It's work. Work." That word became his shield. A shield I wasn't allowed to question. The more I noticed, the more excuses I gave him. He was stressed. He was tired. Maybe I wasn't giving him enough attention. Maybe the spark had faded. Marriages change, right? Maybe this was just a phase. But deep down, I felt it, that gnawing unease in the pit of my stomach. That whisper that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the calls and dinners and the phone. It was him. The man I married, the man who used to look at me like I was the only person in the room, was slipping away. His eyes drifted elsewhere, even when he was physically present. At bedtime, when he used to curl up beside me, now he'd lie stiff, scrolling on his phone until I fell asleep. And the intimacy, it faded like a candle burning out. No more spontaneous kisses in the kitchen, no more lingering hugs before he left for work. It was as if he was building a wall brick by brick, separating himself from me. I remember one night in particular. It was late, past midnight, when I heard the garage door creak open. Daniel walked in, tie loosened, shirt untucked. He looked exhausted, but there was something else, a faint trace of cologne I didn't recognize. Not the one he used to wear for me. "Long night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Yeah," he muttered, pouring himself a glass of water. "Client dinner. Ran late." I wanted to believe him. I told myself I had to believe him. Because the alternative, that my husband, the father of my children, the man who promised me forever, might be lying, that thought was unbearable. So I brushed it off. Just like I brushed off the missed calls, the empty seat at the dinner table, the secretive phone habits, the late nights. I told myself it was work. Stress. Life. Anything but what it really was. But here's the thing about denial, it only lasts so long. Eventually, the truth finds a way to seep through the cracks, no matter how tightly you try to seal them. At that point, though, I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. So I clung to the illusion of our perfect life, even as it slowly slipped away from me. What I didn't know was that the first real proof of my husband's betrayal was about to reveal itself in a way I could never ignore. And once I saw it, I could never unsee it. The night it all changed started out ordinary, almost boring in its normalcy. The kids were in bed, the dishwasher was humming in the background, and I was folding laundry on the couch while Daniel showered upstairs. Nothing about that moment hinted that my world was seconds away from splitting in two. Then his phone buzzed. At first, I didn't even look up. His phone was always buzzing, emails, calendar alerts, the endless notifications of a man who claimed to be in demand. But then it buzzed again. And again. The sound was sharper somehow, slicing through the quiet of the house. Out of instinct, my eyes flicked toward the counter where he'd left it. The screen lit up. A text. And just like that, my entire body froze. Can't wait to see you again, Red Heart, L. My heart stopped. My hands, mid-fold with one of Noah's t-shirts, trembled so violently I nearly dropped it. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind scrambled for explanations, rationalizations, anything to make sense of what I'd just seen. Maybe it was a work colleague. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe I misread it. But that heart emoji, there was no mistaking it. That wasn't work. That wasn't business. That was intimacy. I stared at the glowing screen, willing it to change, to tell me I was wrong. But the message burned itself into my memory, each letter seared into my brain like fire. Who was L? I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't scroll. I didn't dare touch it. My hands felt like lead, heavy and useless. Because deep down, I already knew. Daniel was hiding something. The shower upstairs shut off, jolting me back into motion. Panic surged through me. If he came downstairs and caught me staring at his phone, the questions would start. I didn't want him to know, not yet. So I did what any woman in shock would do, I pretended nothing happened. I shoved the folded shirt into the basket, grabbed another, forced my hands to move even as they trembled. By the time Daniel walked in, hair damp, smelling faintly of soap, I was sitting there, folding laundry like nothing was wrong. "Hey," he said casually, pouring himself a glass of water. "Kids go down okay?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Out like lights." He didn't notice my shaking hands. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. He picked up his phone from the counter, glanced at it, then slipped it into his pocket with practiced ease. And that's when the realization hit me, not only was he hiding something, but he was comfortable hiding it. He'd been doing it for long enough to make it second nature. I barely slept that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Daniel snored softly beside me, my mind racing. The message looped in my head like a broken record. "Can't wait to see you again, Red Heart, L." Who was she? How long had this been going on? And most terrifying of all, what else had I missed? The next morning, I woke up with a resolve I didn't recognize in myself. The Emily who believed in fairy tales, in Forever Us, in rooftop anniversaries, that Emily was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone who needed answers. I didn't confront him right away. That would have been too easy, too impulsive. And Daniel, if he really was lying, would be ready with excuses. No. I needed proof. I needed the truth in my own hands before I dared to accuse him. So I watched. For the next several days, I paid attention in a way I never had before. Every time his phone buzzed, I noted the way he gripped it tighter, angling the screen away from me. Every late-night, client dinner suddenly seemed more suspicious. The new cologne he wore, the extra care he put into ironing his shirts, the way he lingered in the garage on phone calls before coming inside, all of it screamed at me now. It was like pulling back a curtain I hadn't even realized was there. My perfect marriage, the one I had defended to friends, the one I had built my entire identity around, was starting to look like a carefully staged play. And behind the curtain, something ugly was waiting. The more I watched, the clearer it became, that text wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a glimpse into a hidden life my husband had been living right under my nose. And the worst part? He didn't even seem to care if I noticed. By the end of that week, the unease had hardened into something sharper. Determination. If he thought he could play me for a fool, he was wrong. Because now, I wasn't just his wife. I was his shadow. And shadows see everything. After that text message, something inside me snapped. Or maybe snapped isn't the right word, because I didn't explode, I didn't confront, I didn't rage. Instead, I became cold. Focused. Calculated. I realized that if Daniel was hiding something from me, if he truly had another woman, I couldn't just rely on intuition. Intuition is what gets dismissed. Intuition is what men call paranoia. No, what I needed was evidence. Hard, undeniable, black and white truth. So I became a detective in my own home. At first, it felt ridiculous. Me, Emily Carter, stay-at-home mom, PDA volunteer, queen of bake sales, now sneaking around my own kitchen like a spy. But desperation makes you resourceful. And when your whole marriage is on the line, you do things you never thought you were capable of. I started with the obvious, his phone. Daniel guarded it like it was a lifeline, keeping it in his pocket at all times. He even started taking it into the bathroom, which he never used to do. But one night, he slipped up. He fell asleep on the couch, phone still clutched in his hand, screen glowing faintly. My pulse hammered as I carefully slid it out of his grip. His fingers twitched, and I froze, terrified he'd wake. But he rolled over, mumbling in his sleep. Heart pounding, I held the phone in my hand, staring at the lock screen. Of course it was locked. A 6-digit code. Something I should have known, but didn't. When had he changed it? I wanted to hurl it against the wall. Instead, I set it back in his hand, pretending nothing happened. But that failed attempt only made me more determined. If I couldn't get into the phone, I'd watch everything else. I paid attention to the little details. The shirts he suddenly wanted dry cleaned instead of washed at home. The unexplained charges on our joint bank account, meals at restaurants I'd never heard of, boutique hotel bills that didn't line up with his business trips. Even the gas mileage on his car didn't add up. I began keeping a notebook, hidden at the back of my closet, where I wrote down every inconsistency. Date, time, excuse, and the little clues he left behind. It was like piecing together a puzzle where the picture was becoming clearer and darker with every entry. One night, I smelled it again, the cologne. Stronger this time. A scent that wasn't mine, wasn't his usual brand. I leaned in closer as he hugged me goodnight, and underneath the cologne, I smelled something else, perfume. Feminine. Sweet. My stomach churned. Long day? I asked, forcing my voice not to shake. Yeah, he said shortly, avoiding my eyes. Just tired. And that's when it really hit me, he wasn't even trying anymore. The man who once couldn't lie to save his life was now doing it so easily, so casually, that it sent chills down my spine. The more I watched, the angrier I became. Every time he smiled at his phone, every time he left the table to take a call, every time he came home late reeking of someone else's perfume, it all fueled the fire in me. But I stayed silent. Because silence was my weapon. While Daniel thought I was clueless, I was studying him. Tracking him. Building a case. And then came the night that sealed it for me. It was late, nearly midnight, and he hadn't come home yet. He texted, "Running late. Don't wait up." My hands shook as I read it, but this time, I didn't just sit at home waiting. I grabbed my keys, slipped on a jacket, and drove. I didn't even know exactly where I was going. I just had this gut instinct to follow. To see for myself. His car wasn't hard to spot, a black SUV parked in the lot of a small boutique hotel on the edge of town. My breath caught in my throat as I pulled into a space far enough away to remain hidden. And then I saw him. Daniel. My husband. The father of my children. Walking across the lot with his shirt neatly pressed, his tie loosened, a smile on his face I hadn't seen in months. And then she appeared. Tall. Brunette. Wearing a red dress that clung to her in a way that screamed intimacy. She ran into his arms, and without hesitation, he kissed her. Right there. In the open. Like our marriage didn't exist. Like I didn't exist. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Tears blurred my vision, but I couldn't look away. It felt like watching a stranger wear the face of the man I loved. In that moment, I knew two things with absolute certainty. 1, Daniel Carter was betraying me. And 2, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Because I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was his witness. And soon, I would be his reckoning. There are moments in life when time seems to fracture, splitting into before and after. Standing there in the dark of that hotel parking lot, watching Daniel kiss another woman like she was his entire world, I felt the line crack open beneath my feet. Before, I was Emily Carter, wife of Daniel, mother of 2, believer in love, in loyalty, in family. After, I was a woman staring at the naked truth. My husband was a liar, a cheater, a man I didn't recognize anymore. My whole body trembled, but I couldn't look away. Their kiss wasn't fleeting. It wasn't a careless mistake. It was practiced, familiar, the kind of kiss you give someone you've kissed 1,000 times before. My stomach churned as her hands curled around his neck, his fingers tracing her back with ease. He'd touched me like that once. Now, that intimacy was hers. I wanted to scream. To burst out of my car, storm across the lot, rip him away from her and shout to the world, "This man is a fraud." But I didn't. My hand stayed welded to the steering wheel, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Because rage wasn't enough. Rage would only create a scene. Rage would make me look hysterical, emotional, weak. But silence had power. So I stayed in the shadows and watched as my husband walked into that hotel with another woman. Minutes felt like hours. My chest ached, my eyes stung, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not yet. Not here. Instead, I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and snapped a photo. The grainy image of Daniel holding her hand under the glow of the hotel's neon sign burned into my gallery. Proof. Evidence. A piece of the puzzle I was building. I drove home on autopilot. The city lights blurred, the radio hummed, but I heard nothing. My mind was a storm of disbelief and devastation. Images of Daniel's smile, his laugh, his promises collided with the picture of him holding that woman. Which version was real? The man who tucked our kids into bed, or the man who disappeared into hotels at midnight? By the time I pulled into the driveway, the tears finally came. I sat there in the dark, sobbing into my hands, my body shaking with a grief I couldn't contain. Grief for my marriage. For the life I thought I had. For the woman I used to be before the truth ripped her apart. When I finally went inside, the house felt colder. Quieter. I walked past the photos on the walls: Olivia's kindergarten graduation, Noah's first birthday, family vacations where Daniel stood beside me smiling, his arm around my waist. Those smiles mocked me now. They weren't memories. They were lies carved into frames. I collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling until the sun began to rise. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. The red dress. His hands. Their kiss. When Daniel finally walked through the door at dawn, I forced myself to stay calm. He smelled faintly of soap, his shirt wrinkled, his hair damp like he'd showered somewhere else. He kissed me on the cheek, casual, routine, like nothing had happened. "Long night?" I asked softly. "Yeah," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "Client issue. Took forever to sort out." And just like that, he lied. Boldly. Easily. Right to my face. The ache in my chest hardened into something sharper. Not grief. Not even anger. Determination. Because now I knew the truth. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. Daniel Carter was cheating on me. And if he thought I was going to confront him without proof, if he thought he could gaslight me into silence, he was wrong. I smiled faintly, nodding like I believed him. "You must be exhausted," I said, my voice calm, almost sweet. "Go get some rest." As he trudged upstairs to bed, I sat back down on the couch, pulled out my phone, and opened the photo I'd taken. Daniel and the woman in red, hand in hand under the hotel's glow. I stared at it until the rage simmered into resolve. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. Because now that I had the truth, I was going to use it. And Daniel? He had no idea that his perfect little double life was about to unravel piece by piece. The house was quiet after Daniel collapsed into bed, his soft snores drifting through the upstairs hallway like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had changed. I sat alone in the living room, the glow of my phone illuminating that damning photo once again. Daniel and the woman in red. Her face half-turned, his smile unguarded, their fingers laced together like lovers who had nothing to hide. It should have broken me completely. And in some ways, it did. A piece of me, the naive, trusting wife, died that night. But what rose in her place wasn't weakness. It was resolve. I realized something as I sat there listening to the rhythm of his breathing upstairs. Daniel didn't deserve my rage. He didn't deserve my tears. He deserved something colder, sharper. Something that would cut deeper than screaming or throwing things ever could. He deserved silence. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of strategy. The silence of a woman who would no longer play the fool. I thought about confronting him right away. Storming into the bedroom, slamming the photo onto the nightstand, demanding answers he'd never give truthfully. But what would that achieve? He'd lie, spin another story, maybe even cry. Daniel was good at pretending, he'd been doing it for months. And me? I'd be left with nothing but his rehearsed apologies and an empty promise that it would never happen again. No. I wouldn't give him that power. Instead, I decided to play the long game. The next morning, I brewed coffee, fried eggs, and greeted him with a smile so convincing it startled even me. He sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing at me as he muttered, "Morning." "Morning," I replied, placing the mug in front of him. My voice was light, easy. If he noticed the faint tremor in my hands, he didn't mention it. As he sipped his coffee, I studied him. Every detail. The crease in his brow as he read his emails. The absent-minded way he tapped his fingers against the table. The small smirk he wore when he thought of something amusing, something he didn't bother to share with me. It struck me then how little I truly knew the man across from me. For years, I thought I did. I thought his secrets were mine, his burdens shared with me. But now, every gesture, every breath, every silence felt like evidence of a stranger I'd been living with all along. And that stranger had underestimated me. Over the next few days, I perfected my performance. I laughed at his jokes, kissed him goodbye at the door, texted him during the day like nothing was wrong. All the while, I was cataloging everything. Receipts left in his pockets. Calendar alerts that popped up on his phone when he forgot to silence it. Credit card charges that didn't align with his so-called client dinners. At night, when he claimed he was working late, I began following him. Not always, just enough to know the pattern. The same hotel. The same red dress. The same betrayal playing on repeat like a bad film I couldn't turn off. Each time, my heart ached less. The shock was gone, replaced by a cold clarity. I wasn't chasing closure anymore. I was gathering ammunition. There's a kind of power that comes with knowing the truth while the liar believes you're still in the dark. Daniel strutted through our home like the same charming husband, kissing the kids goodnight, asking me about my day, all while weaving his web of deceit. And I let him. I even smiled while doing it. But beneath that smile, I was rewriting the rules. The old Emily, the one who begged for scraps of attention, who second-guessed her instincts, who stayed silent out of fear, was gone. In her place stood a woman with a plan. Because if Daniel thought he could shatter my world and walk away unscathed, he was about to learn the truth. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't even going to cry anymore. I was going to disappear. Not just leave the room or the house. I was going to vanish from his carefully curated life in a way that would haunt him more than any confrontation ever could. He would wake up one morning and find everything he'd taken for granted, his wife, his children, his family, gone without a trace. And in that silence, he would finally hear the echo of what he had destroyed. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, listening to the steady rise and fall of his chest, I closed my eyes and made the vow. I would not confront him. I would not give him the satisfaction of my pain. I would vanish. And when I did, Daniel Carter would learn what true betrayal felt like. Once the decision was made, everything I did carried new weight. I was no longer just a wife drifting through the fog of betrayal, I was an investigator. A strategist. Every word I spoke, every smile I gave, every glance I stole at Daniel's phone was part of a larger design. It began small. Subtle. The first time was almost by accident. Daniel had left his jacket draped across the arm of the couch. I slipped my hand into the pocket, expecting nothing more than a few loose receipts. What I found instead made my pulse quicken, a folded slip from the Crimson Lounge, a high-end restaurant we hadn't visited in years. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, a dessert for 2. The date matched one of the nights he claimed he was working late. I pressed the paper flat against the coffee table, staring at the ink until my hands stopped trembling. Then I slid it into a folder I had hidden at the back of my closet. My folder. My record of truth. From that moment forward, every shred of inconsistency became evidence. When he fell asleep on the couch one evening, phone in hand, I risked a quick scroll through his messages. He was clever, he deleted most of them, but not all. A text thread with L was empty, wiped clean, but the timestamps of missing messages were still visible. Holes in a fabric that was supposed to look seamless. I took photos, quietly archiving the gaps. Later, I noticed his credit card statement tucked in the drawer of his desk. I pretended to be searching for stamps, my hands steady even as my eyes raced across the list: hotel charges, gift shops, 2 charges at a jewelry boutique. He hadn't given me jewelry in years. Each time, I copied, photographed, and stored the evidence in that hidden folder. I wasn't reckless. I didn't confront him, didn't so much as flinch when he kissed me goodnight. I played the role he expected, the trusting wife, oblivious, devoted. But behind the mask, I was building a case that could crush him if I chose to. Sometimes, the weight of it all nearly broke me. Sitting in the bathroom with the door locked, scrolling through the proof on my phone, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This was my husband. The father of my children. And here I was, cataloging his betrayal like a crime scene investigator. But then I would think of Olivia and Noah. Their bright eyes, their innocent smiles, their trust in both of us to keep them safe. They deserved the truth, even if they wouldn't understand it yet. And more than that, I deserved the truth. I deserved to see Daniel's lies laid bare, undeniable, impossible for him to twist into excuses. The strangest part was how normal everything looked from the outside. To our friends, to the neighbors, to his co-workers, we were still Daniel and Emily Carter, the perfect couple, the family who hosted barbecues and smiled in Christmas cards. Daniel was still charming at dinner parties, still attentive enough to avoid suspicion. And me? I played along, my performance Oscar-worthy. But inside, the silence grew sharper. Deadlier. I began noticing the little details Daniel overlooked. The faint cologne that wasn't his. The lipstick smudge on his shirt collar that didn't belong to me. Once, a hotel key card slipped from his wallet when he tossed it on the dresser. I picked it up, studied the embossed logo, then slid it back before he noticed. Another entry in my folder, another nail in the coffin of our marriage. The more I gathered, the more a strange calm settled over me. The hurt was still there, yes, but it was tempered by a sense of control. Daniel thought he was orchestrating his secret life, pulling the strings without my knowledge. But the truth was, I was pulling strings of my own. Late at night, after the children were asleep and Daniel claimed to be at meetings, I spread my evidence across the bed like puzzle pieces. Receipts, photos, bank statements, screenshots. Each one a fragment of a story he thought he was clever enough to hide. It was all there. The dinners. The hotels. The gifts. The woman. And one day soon, when the time was right, I would make my move. Not with a fight. Not with screaming or ultimatums. But with silence so complete it would echo in his bones. Because Daniel didn't just break my heart, he underestimated me. And that mistake would cost him everything. The folder of evidence grew thicker each week, but it wasn't the papers or screenshots that gave me strength. It was the clarity. The knowledge that I wasn't paranoid, I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't weak. Daniel's betrayal was real, and now so was my resolve. But evidence alone wasn't enough. If I truly wanted to take back control, I needed a plan. Not a confrontation, he'd expect that. Not tears, he'd dismiss them. No, my plan would be the one thing he'd never see coming. I would vanish. Not half-heartedly. Not for a night at my sister's house or a weekend at a hotel. I would disappear from his life in a way that left him scrambling, haunted by the emptiness he created. The first step was money. Daniel controlled most of our accounts, and I knew if I left recklessly, he could cut me off. So, quietly, I began skimming. $100 here, $200 there, small withdrawals he'd never notice. I tucked the cash into a shoebox hidden behind old sweaters in the closet. Slowly, the stack grew thick enough to feel like freedom. Next came logistics. I started making quiet trips to my sister Rachel's house under the guise of catching up. Each time, I brought something small, clothes for Olivia, books for Noah, old toys they no longer used. Rachel didn't ask questions, but her eyes lingered on me, suspicion soft in her gaze. I wasn't ready to tell her yet. Not until everything was in place. At home, I practiced invisibility. I matched Daniel's energy, mirrored his moods, never pressed too hard. If he was distracted, I busied myself with the kids. If he was cheerful, I laughed along. To him, nothing seemed unusual. But inside, every second was a calculation. I also prepared the children, though they didn't realize it. I began talking about adventures and new beginnings, weaving bedtime stories about brave families who traveled light and found happiness in unexpected places. Olivia, curious and bright, asked questions. Noah just giggled, clutching his stuffed bear. They didn't know it yet, but soon, they'd be characters in a story of survival. The hardest part was hiding the truth from myself. Every time Daniel brushed his lips against my cheek, every time he called me Em with that familiar affection, I felt the weight of the lie pressing harder. I had to remind myself that love had no place here anymore. Only strategy. One night, as he slept beside me, I slipped quietly out of bed and padded into the hallway. The children's doors were closed, their soft breathing drifting through the silence. I opened the closet and pulled down the shoebox of cash. My hands shook as I counted it. Enough for a car rental, a few weeks in a small apartment, groceries, and gas. Enough to get us out before he realized what was happening. I sat there on the floor, money scattered like fallen leaves around me, and whispered to myself, "You can do this. You will do this." Rachel's voice echoed in my mind from months earlier, "You're stronger than you think, Em. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." She was right. Daniel had chipped away at me for years, convincing me to doubt myself, to accept less, to believe his lies. But he hadn't destroyed me. Not yet. And soon, he'd learn just how dangerous it was to underestimate a woman who had nothing left to lose. Over the next week, I created my escape kit. A small duffel bag hidden under the trunk in the garage. Inside, clothes for the kids, birth certificates, a spare phone charger, and the shoebox of money. I rehearsed the plan in my mind like choreography. One night, when Daniel was with her, I would load the kids into the car under the guise of a surprise trip. We would drive straight to Rachel's, then vanish into the quiet safety of her guest room until I could find a place of our own. Every detail mattered. Timing. Secrecy. Calmness. Because if Daniel suspected even for a second, everything could unravel. And so I smiled wider. I laughed louder. I kissed him with lips that hid their disgust. He believed me. Why wouldn't he? He thought I was still the same Emily, faithful, naive, blind. But in reality, I was a shadow in my own home, already halfway gone. And soon, Daniel would wake up to a silence he couldn't escape. A silence more punishing than any confrontation could ever be. The silence of an empty house. The silence of consequences. The silence of me, gone. The night I chose was unremarkable, which was exactly why it was perfect. Daniel had kissed the kids goodnight with his usual distracted air, mumbled something about late meetings, and vanished into the dark with his suit jacket slung over his arm. I watched him drive away, taillights shrinking into the distance, and for the first time in months, I exhaled without fear. This was it. I moved with precision. Olivia and Noah stirred sleepily when I whispered about a surprise trip. I framed it as an adventure, pajamas and all. Noah clutched his bear, Olivia grabbed her storybook, and within minutes I had them buckled into the car. The duffel bag was already in the trunk, the shoebox of cash tucked safely inside. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back at the house one last time. The porch light glowed, steady and oblivious. That house had been my prison, my battlefield, my stage. Now it was just a shell. And I was finally free. Rachel's porch light was waiting for me. She opened the door in her robe, eyes widening at the sight of me with the kids half asleep in my arms. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with both relief and fear. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat burned with unshed tears, but my resolve held. I tucked the kids into the guest room, kissed their foreheads, and watched as their small bodies melted into the safety of sleep. By the time I crawled into the spare bed beside them, Daniel was probably still with her. Still smiling. Still thinking he had me fooled. The irony almost made me laugh. But laughter wasn't what woke him the next morning. It was silence. No footsteps padding down the hallway. No sound of cartoons from the living room. No smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen. Just silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. I imagined his confusion as he called out, Kids. I imagined the chill creeping over him when no answer came. His footsteps quickening, searching every room. The bathroom. The bedrooms. The garage. Empty. He would have found the closet first. My clothes gone. The kids' favorite toys missing. The shoebox of money he didn't know existed taken. His world, stripped bare. And then, the panic. His hands fumbling for his phone, dialing me again and again. My screen lit up beside me in Rachel's house, buzzing with his name. I let it ring. Again and again. 10 times. 15. 20. I never answered. The voicemails came next. His voice cracked, frantic. Emily, where are you? Please call me back. I'm worried. Did something happen? The kids, God, are the kids with you? Please, just answer. Don't do this. Whatever you think you saw, it's not what it looks like. I can explain. Please, Please. Explain. The word made my skin crawl. As though a year of lies could be condensed into a neat little story to absolve him. As though his betrayal needed only the right spin to disappear. When I didn't respond, the desperation deepened. His texts grew erratic, pleading, bargaining, threatening. You can't just take the kids. This is insane. We can fix this. Please, don't do this to me. To him. That was the part that struck me most. Even in panic, even in loss, his focus wasn't on what he'd done to us. It was on what I was doing to him. Meanwhile, Olivia stirred beside me, curling against my arm. Noah murmured in his sleep, clutching his bear. Their soft breaths anchored me in a way his words never could. Rachel sat across the room, phone in hand. Do you want me to block his number? She asked quietly. I shook my head. No. Let him feel it. Because this was the silence I had promised myself. Not the silence of fear or submission, but the silence of consequence. Every unanswered call, every ignored message, every hour of not knowing, it was my revenge. My justice. My power. By evening, Daniel had called 37 times. My inbox was flooded with apologies, excuses, half-truths wrapped in desperation. He was unraveling, piece by piece, and all I had to do was nothing. For years, he had controlled the narrative. Now, he was trapped in the void I'd left behind. And in that void, he was finally forced to face the truth. He had lost me. He had lost the children. He had lost everything. And I had found something far more valuable than vengeance. Freedom. It didn't take Daniel long to find me. I'd expected it. We weren't ghosts, we hadn't disappeared off the map entirely. Rachel's address was no secret, and I wanted him to find me. Because when he did, there would be no more games, no more excuses. Only truth. The knock came late in the afternoon, hard enough to rattle the door. Rachel met my eyes from across the room. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she might turn him away. But I shook my head. It's time, I whispered. She opened the door, and there he was. Daniel Carter. My husband. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loose, his hair a mess. But it wasn't his disheveled appearance that struck me, it was his eyes. Wild. Desperate. Emily, he breathed, stepping forward like he'd just crossed a desert and found water. Thank God. The kids, where are they? I stood from the couch, straightening my shoulders, my heart pounding but steady. They're safe, I said flatly. Relief flickered across his face. He tried to move past Rachel, but she blocked him with a firm hand. Not until Emily says so. His jaw clenched, but he didn't fight her. Instead, his gaze darted back to me. Please. I've been calling, texting. I thought something happened to you. You can't just vanish like that. A bitter laugh slipped from my lips. Can't I? You vanished from me months ago, Daniel. I just finally returned the favor. He flinched, but quickly composed himself. Look, I know what you think you saw. I cut him off, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Don't you dare insult me with that line. I don't think I saw anything. I know. His face paled, but he pressed on, the salesman in him scrambling for a pitch. It was a mistake. A stupid, one-time mistake. It didn't mean anything. One time. My voice rose, trembling with the force of months of silence breaking open. Do you want to see the receipts, Daniel? The hotel charges? The dinners? The jewelry you never gave me? Or maybe the photos? I grabbed the folder from the side table and flung it onto the coffee table. Papers spilled out, receipts, screenshots, bank statements, photos. His eyes darted over them, his face draining of color with every piece of evidence. This isn't what it looks like, he stammered weakly. I stepped closer, my fury controlled but unrelenting. Really? Because it looks like a husband who's been sleeping with another woman for months while lying to his wife and children. It looks like betrayal, Daniel. It looks like you. Silence. Heavy. Crippling. For the first time, Daniel had no script. No clever retort. No excuse polished enough to cover the raw ugliness of what he'd done. He sank onto the couch, his hands clutching his hair. Emily, please, he whispered, his voice breaking. I love you. I love the kids. I don't know why I did this. I made a mistake, but I can fix it. We can fix it. Just give me another chance. The tears came then, not mine, but his. Watching Daniel cry should have shattered me. Once, it would have. But now, it felt hollow. Manipulative. Too little, too late. I knelt down, bringing my face level with his, my voice steady as stone. Do you know what the worst part is, Daniel? It's not that you cheated. It's not even the lies. It's that you thought so little of me that you believed I'd never notice. That I'd never be strong enough to walk away. That you could break me, and I'd still stay. His eyes met mine, wide and wet. I was wrong, he whispered. Yes, I said coldly. You were. I stood, gathering the scattered papers back into the folder. The sound of my children laughing faintly from the guest room drifted into the silence, a cruel reminder of what was at stake. This isn't just about us anymore, I continued, my voice firm. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed them. And they deserve better than a father who lies and cheats. They deserve a mother who refuses to let them grow up believing this is love. Daniel's head dropped into his hands, shoulders shaking. He had no words left, no defenses. Just the crushing weight of reality pressing down at last. I turned to Rachel, who stood like a sentinel by the door. Make sure he leaves, I said softly. Then I walked away, into the safety of the room where my children slept, my decision carved deep and unshakable. Behind me, Daniel's sobs echoed through the walls. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Rachel's kitchen windows, spilling across the table where I sat with a mug of untouched coffee. My hands wrapped around the cup, not for warmth, but for steadiness. I had slept little, though the weight on my chest felt lighter than it had in months. Daniel hadn't left quietly. Rachel had to threaten to call the police before he finally staggered to his car, his face streaked with tears, his pleas echoing in the driveway. But even as his taillights disappeared, I knew it wasn't over. Men like Daniel didn't give up control so easily. He'd be back. And he was, less than 24 hours later. The knock on the door this time wasn't desperate. It was deliberate. 3 sharp raps, confident, almost rehearsed. I rose, my stomach tightening, and opened it. There he stood. Freshly showered, dressed in a crisp suit, tie perfectly knotted. The mask was back on. His eyes were red, but his posture was controlled, as if he'd spent the night rehearsing his apology in the mirror. "Emily," he said softly, placing a hand on the doorframe like he still had the right. "Can we talk? Just us." I studied him for a long moment. "Rachel stays," I said finally. He exhaled sharply, frustration flashing, but nodded. "Fine." We sat in the living room, a triangle of tension, Rachel perched in the armchair, me on the couch, Daniel across from me, leaning forward with his hands clasped like a man ready to negotiate a business deal. "I've had time to think," he began, his voice low, measured. "And I realize I've made mistakes. Big ones. But, Emily, you have to believe me, I love you. I love our family. What happened with her, it was meaningless. Just a distraction. A phase. You and the kids, you're my life. Please don't throw that away." I almost laughed at the irony, me throwing us away. Instead, I sat quietly, letting his words hang, watching him squirm when I didn't immediately respond. He leaned closer, desperation seeping into his carefully rehearsed tone. "We can go to counseling. I'll cut her off, I swear. Just, give me one more chance. One more chance." The same words he probably told himself each time he snuck out late. Each time he texted her while I made dinner. Each time he slid into bed reeking of lies. I inhaled slowly, steadying the storm inside me. Then I spoke. "Daniel, do you know what silence feels like?" He blinked, confused. "What?" "Silence," I repeated. "Not peace. Not quiet. But the kind of silence that eats at you. When you speak, and the person you love acts like they can't hear you. When you reach out, and they don't reach back. When you exist, but to them, you don't. Do you know what that feels like?" His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Emily. That's what you gave me," I continued, my voice firm, unwavering. 4 months. You didn't just cheat with your body, Daniel. You cheated with your presence. You gave her your smiles, your secrets, your attention, and you left me with silence. You left your kids with silence. Do you understand that?" His eyes dropped, shame flickering across his face, but I wasn't finished. "You want another chance?" I leaned forward, matching his posture but with a force he couldn't replicate. "Here's the truth, there is no chance. Not anymore. You used up every chance the first time you walked out the door and into her arms. You shattered what we had, and I refuse to glue it back together just so you can break it again." The word struck like a slap. His composure cracked, and for a moment, the mask slipped. His lips trembled, his eyes glistened, but I saw the flicker of anger too, the disbelief that I wasn't bending, wasn't begging. "You can't just erase me from their lives," he said harshly, his voice cracking. "I'm their father." I stood, my height forcing him to look up at me. "No, Daniel. You did that yourself. The moment you chose her over us, you erased yourself. And now, you're going to have to live with it." Rachel shifted uncomfortably, watching the exchange like it was a courtroom drama. Daniel sat frozen, his hands gripping his knees, knuckles white. I took one final step toward him, lowering my voice to a calm, cutting whisper. "Revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be messy. Sometimes, the loudest thing you can give someone is silence. And that's exactly what you'll get from me, from now on." His face fell, his control slipping for good. He looked at me like a man staring at a locked door he no longer had the key to. I turned to Rachel. "Show him out. Without another word, I walked away, leaving Daniel crumbling in the ruins of his own making. My final blow had landed, not with screaming, not with violence, but with the one thing he never expected. The truth. And the silence that followed. The house was quiet again. Not the suffocating, heavy silence Daniel had left me with for months, but something different, gentle, restorative, almost alive. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat, your own breath, your own strength. Rachel returned from the front door, her expression firm but softened with concern. "He's gone," she said simply. I nodded, staring at the window where the sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor. For the first time, I realized I wasn't bracing myself for the sound of his footsteps, his lies, his excuses. He couldn't touch me anymore. The kids woke soon after. Little footsteps padded down the hall, sleepy eyes searching for me. I pulled them into my arms, burying my face in their hair, inhaling their innocence, their warmth. They didn't know everything, not yet. But children sense things. They'd felt the cracks, the distance, the nights I cried quietly in the kitchen. Now, I promised myself, they would feel something else. Stability. Honesty. A mother who refused to let them grow up in a house where betrayal was normal and silence was love. That morning, I made pancakes with them. We laughed when batter splattered the counter, when my youngest tried flipping hers too soon and ended up with scrambled mess instead of circles. For 2 hours, there was no Daniel, no weight, no shadows. Just us. Just life, as it should be. Later, after Rachel left for work, I sat at the kitchen table again, this time with my laptop. I opened a new document. It was time to start writing, letters to the lawyer, notes about custody, financial records. The part of me that once feared the process now felt steel in her spine. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was building something new. Every step forward was an act of defiance against the man who thought he'd broken me. Days blurred into weeks, and weeks into months. Slowly, the rhythm of our lives shifted. The kids adjusted better than I expected, they thrived, even. Soccer games, bedtime stories, Saturday morning cartoons, it wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And I cherished every moment. Daniel tried, of course. Calls, emails, messages that swung between apologies and accusations. Sometimes he begged. Sometimes he threatened. But each time, I answered with the same thing. Silence. That silence became my weapon, my shield, my freedom. One night, months later, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Mommy, are we happy now?" The question nearly broke me. But I smiled, brushing her hair back gently. "Yes, sweetheart. We are." And I meant it. Happiness wasn't some perfect picture of what life was supposed to look like. It wasn't the white picket fence with the smiling husband and wife. It was this, the raw, imperfect, honest truth of building something real out of what had been broken. Daniel was out there somewhere, still chasing, still regretting, still haunted by the choices he made. I didn't hate him anymore. Hatred would mean I still carried him with me. I didn't. He was nothing more than a shadow in a story I had already turned the last page on. What I carried instead was strength. Not the kind that comes from never falling, but the kind that comes from standing back up when the world expects you to stay down. The kids and I were stronger. I was stronger. And as I stood at the window one evening, watching them chase fireflies in the yard, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't been about destroying Daniel. It had been about reclaiming myself. And in the end, silence had spoken louder than any scream, any fight, any plan for vengeance could have. Silence had given me peace. For the first time in a long time, I breathed deeply, freely, and smiled. Because the story wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. It was about us. And it was just beginning.